we have that's going under construction. Another very exciting project we have is the Ellicott Street Sidewalk and Occoquan Greenway Extension Project. This project is essentially, we teamed up with our Parks Department. We received a grant to extend the sidewalk on Tanya Hill and then create additional facilities on Ellicott Street. It is fully funded using grant funding and it's currently under full design. Another very important project is the Prince William Parkway Sidewalk over 95. As you know, this section of Prince William Parkway between the Horner Road Community Lot and Summerland Road does not have a pedestrian facility. So the project itself is fully funded and includes a new sidewalk and adequate ADA ramps and connections. Project is under design, which will take approximately 12 to 18 months, which will then go into construction. Another project we have, it's not really a bike ped improvement, but it is a transit related improvement, is the Horner Road Parking Lot Expansion Project. The county received transit grant funding to restripe some of the sections of the Horner Road Parking Lot, but also expanding certain areas to add capacity. Project is underway. As I mentioned, it's fully funded at $2.5 million. With that, I want to hand it over to my colleague, Richard Wyman. There's a lot of exciting safety initiatives in the county. And I'd like him to highlight some of the key projects here in the Occoquan district. Richard, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Paula. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Good evening, Supervisor, members of the public. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to meet with you tonight to discuss about what we're doing. My name is Richard Wyman. I'm the Traffic Safety Engineering Branch Manager at Prince William County here, and we work with VDOT as well as the community to get smaller improvements. These are things like traffic calming, parking issues, and other general safety improvements such as missing pieces of sidewalk, crosswalks, and those kind of things done. I haven't prepared any slides for you. I just wanted to talk more generally and get your feedback, find out what we don't know that we need to be looking at in your district. One of the big things that we've been working on recently, you may have been hearing about, is automated photo enforcement. Just a month or so ago, the board approved a pilot program for automated photo enforcement in the county, and we're going to be looking at 8 schools and 8 red light intersection signals. The 2 in the Occoquan district that we're looking at are going to be Woodbridge High School there on Old Bridge Road for the school zone. And the intersection that we've identified with high crash accident history is the Harbour Drive intersection there. So that's going to be coming on board this fall as a pilot for 1 year to then look at the benefits of that before we will, and in August we'll be coming back to the board to get direction on whether to proceed with the program or to end at that point depending on the results. In addition to that, we've got some traffic calming happening. We have a couple of roads that are qualified in your district. Valleywood Drive is one that we're in the final stages of developing a traffic calming plan, and I'm about to send that back out to the community for petition. We had some issues on Oakwood, as well as a couple of others. Russell Road, which I believe is no longer in Occoquan district, but we do that all over the place. So if you have any speeding issues, please reach out to us. There's my contact information, and we'll bring you up to speed on the process and what can be done. In addition to that, we are looking at working with the town of Occoquan. We met with them again today. They got some crosswalk issues on Washington Street that we're trying to address, and we also have identified a couple of other places where there's missing pieces of sidewalk near Lake Ridge and there on Cotton Mill Road that we're working to develop and scope to hopefully bring those online as projects in the near future. Once again, the other thing is we also have some street lighting that we do, and currently we're looking at doing some crosswalks on Springwood, specifically near Springwood's elementary school. We want to redo that intersection. I know that Springwood is currently being paved, but hopefully in early next year or this time next year, we can go ahead and make some improvements to crosswalks at that location. So again, there's my contact information. If you have any safety requests or concerns, please reach out to me, and I'll have someone from my team follow up with you, and we'll see what we can do to address that. Thank you, Paul.
Great, thanks, Richard. And that concludes our presentation. What I'll do is put our contact information here in the chat. I have my colleagues here on the call. We're also going to put our interactive web map here in the chat. What it shows is all the active mobility projects in the county. You can sort by project type, sidewalks, trails, roadways, by district, and who implements the projects. So it's a very exciting tool we're going to put in the chat as well. Thank you, Supervisor Boddye. Well, we're ready for questions.
Sure. Thank you so much, Paolo. Appreciate you and your team being on the meeting tonight. As everyone can see, we have a lot of projects going on in the Occoquan district for mobility, safety, easing traffic congestion, for even connectivity when it comes to bike and pedestrian. So we have a lot going on. It's sort of centered around the Old Bridge corridor, which we know is a constant challenge for folks in our district, but we have some other things going on as well. So really appreciate Paolo and the team highlighting that. Before we jump to the questions that we have pre-made, Paolo, I wanted you to talk a little bit about the sort of change in paradigm of the thought process of the transportation department over the last few years, going from just building roads and being car-centric towards that more mobility and multimodal sort of thought process. So could you open up with that before we get to questions?
Sure. Thank you, Supervisor Boddye. Thanks for that opportunity. Historically, the department and the transportation program focused on roads. The board funded a lot of the programs in the county through a road bond. And over the years, we really looked at improving mobility and looking at different multimodal options here in the county. A great example is a recently improved mobility chapter. It used to be the transportation chapter. So we have a transit plan that looks at future transit. We also have a near-term transit plan. We have a trails plan, and we look at active mobility in the county. So as you can see with some of the projects we talked about today, we don't just look at roads, but we're really shifting to other multimodal improvements. We have a great relationship with OmniRide. We have projects along the Route 1 corridor that look at installing bus shelters. We have other projects that look at implementing transit centers. So we're really being multimodal to really cater to the needs of the growing community.
Thank you for that, Paolo. And I know that some folks leading up to this town hall had questions specifically about that 123 and Old Bridge Road intersection. As Paolo said, we're sort of taking a pause on that, looking at different alternatives, and we will be actually having a separate town hall / listening session on that specific intersection. So look for that in the coming months. Thank you so much, Paolo. So on to questions, going through the asked questions here first. How are decisions made to prioritize pedestrian safety and infrastructure projects? What data is used, and are community members engaged in these decisions?
Sure. Great question. When it comes to pedestrian safety improvements or projects, it's really based on community requests and input, but also we look at different quantitative data. We look at traffic volumes, speed, crash data, and look at different roadway safety audits. We've done a lot of safety audits and gap analyses for these. In terms of how members can engage, we speak directly to constituents. We work with the different board members in their offices on potential projects. We receive input at the Planning Commission as part of our comprehensive plan update and scenario plans. And we also work very closely with the Trails and Blueways Council, as well as various advisory commissions.
Thank you for that, Paolo. And speaking of the Trails and Blueways Council, both of our Occoquan district appointees, Neil Nelson and Eileen Sheridan, are indeed on. So wanted to highlight them and thank them for all the work they do to really talk about and expand the Blueways and trails in our community. That being said, the only thing I'll add to that is, again, as Paolo said, and Richard Weinman said it earlier as well, we are also a corollary for your ideas and for your input on those safety projects. So Springwood is a great example of that. We get calls and emails and things like that, probably at least once a month in regards to Springwood. So we're really looking at that intersection. But again, as you all see issues of speeding, traffic uncertainty, congestion, what have you, especially when it comes to traffic calming, please reach out to our office. We're more than happy to run it over to the transportation department and really collaborate with them on looking to see what's possible. That said, next question. What future Occoquan transportation projects are going to be submitted for 70% NBTA funding? For those that don't know, NBTA is the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. They do a lot of regional funding for our projects. And the second part of this question is, will we continue to submit road first projects or projects to help shift mode share and help reduce car dependency?
Sure. So in terms of projects that we plan to submit for MVTA 70% funding, we have to look at different projects in MVTA's long-range transportation plan that also meet the needs of our comprehensive plan or small area plan. In this round, what we're looking at with coordination from the supervisor's office is a transit center at the landing small area. We have the Horner Road commuter lot. We have a lot of commuters. We have a lot of bicyclists and pedestrians at that location. So we'll be submitting funding to request for a transit center, more of a transfer center where we're going to have bus shelters, lighting, and other amenities to really support transit. So that's what we're looking at for the Occoquan district. In terms of other projects in the county, we're looking at a couple intersection improvements, 1123, Route 234 and Sully Manor Drive. We're looking at the Route 234 corridor. We're going to look at a technology or intelligent technology project along that corridor. I had mentioned the transit hub at the landing, but we're also looking at transit hub at the Triangle area here in the Dumfries as well as a major sidewalk over on I-95 at Route 234. So these are some of the different multimodal projects we're looking at. Yes, we do have roadway projects, but we're really looking at other improvements, such as I mentioned, a sidewalk and different transit projects as well.
Thank you for that, Paolo. In that vein, since you did bring up the Horner Road lot, the next question I'm going to ask is, very few people are using the commuter lot these days. Why are there plans to expand the Horner lots, especially with the commuter garage being built by Stonebridge?
Great question. And you know, during COVID, the lot was very empty. Pre-pandemic, the Horner Road commuter lot was over capacity, and we did see a decrease in usage during the pandemic. Working with our regional partners, we've seen that traffic, based on the travel data, both from NVTA and the Transportation Planning Board and other regional partners, it shows that volumes in the region are close to where they are pre-pandemic. You're just seeing them at different times of day. So we do see commuters returning. We do see traffic volumes rebounding faster in outer jurisdictions such as Prince William County. So we're really trying to anticipate some of the return of our commuters here in the future.
Thank you for that. The only other thing I would add to that is we know that the Horner Road lot was one of the, if not the most used lot in the county. And we know with folks returning to work, we know that some federal agencies are going from a 2 to 3 day model to a 4 to 5 day model. We'll continue to see that uptick. We'll also let our friends at Omni Ride later on talk about some of their data and how they've seen ridership increase, which we know the Horner Road isn't just an area for people to come and park, but they also take the bus and what have you. It's also in the far future, that area is scheduled to have more multimodal functions, as Paulo said, a transit hub, and also hopefully eventually a metro station. So there's a lot going on in that corridor that is we're planning for the future, not just looking at now. So I want to make sure that we emphasize that. Next question is a little bit of a verbose one, but give me a second here. The 2040 mobility chapter includes 416 miles of new bike pedestrian infrastructure. We're adding 25 miles per year. The FY24 budget funded 2019 bond projects and shared use paths along new major roads. However, the Capital Improvement Program, CIP, has no funding for other bike ped projects from the general fund. Would you consider prioritizing FY25 budget funding for bike pedestrian transit projects, have Prince William County start submitting applications in BTA to fund such projects rather than new road expansions? Before you jump in on that, Paulo, I'll answer the first part of that and then re-ask the second part of that for you to think about. I'm always interested in us adding more multimodal projects to the CIP and to other things. I know the CIP is sort of the most prolific way in which we put funding on the map for next 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. However, we do have other sort of cues that we put funding into. NBTA was mentioned. I know that Paulo, Rick, Megan, and their team do a great job of looking at sort of these other large, long range transportation programs. NBTA is one. The Commonwealth Transportation is another one. There are a lot of other long range transportation funding sources out there that we program a lot of this stuff into that isn't just in the local CIP. And so there are a lot of different long range plans that we look into when it comes to putting this funding in. I'm all for us putting in local funding and looking at transportation in the CIP, but also knowing that we're part of a much larger microcosm of regional funding priorities. I always like to get those into there as well. So Paulo, please feel free to add anything you'd like to that, as well as the question of have Prince William County start submitting applications to NBTA to fund such projects rather than just road expansion.
Sure. Great question. And thanks for the information that you added. We've noticed when it comes to grant funding over the years, the type of funding available has changed. It's historically been funding projects that reduce congestion, which is your roadway capacity enhancing projects. But over the years, which is evident in our CIP as well, is we're looking at different types of projects. We recently received authorization from the board to submit a grant for charging stations. We've submitted and received funding actually from the Transportation Planning Board to study green infrastructure here in the county and some of our major corridors like Route 1. So based on guidance from our mobility chapter and scenario plans, we're looking at different types of grants here in the future. And as you see, and if you follow the CIP, the types of projects, especially mobility projects, will change over time to really be more multimodal. Whether it's a transit hub that we're submitting for MBTA or other projects that improve access to transit, the type of projects we really have are being diversified as we go into the future.
Thank you for that, Paulo. And the last thing I'll add about that is, with our other various partners like OmniRide, who we'll hear from soon, there is also other local funding that's going into programs that they're looking at. I'm also on various regional boards that are looking at other funding priorities as well. I was actually picked for the Commuter's Choice program, for the 495, 395 Commuter Choice program. So that's also another long range sort of projects that they're looking at that are a lot more shifted towards multimodal bus transit, trails, train transit, things of that nature to get people out of their cars and more on a public transit and what have you. So there's a lot going on beyond just the CIP. So I just want to highlight that as well. The next question is, what is the design plan for the Prince William Parkway I-95 bike and pedestrian solution? I know, Paulo, you showed that as in your list of projects. So if you could go back to that right quick and sort of add any more elaboration you might want to.
Sure. The funding received is for a 5-foot sidewalk over 95. What it does includes funding for the crosswalk. We're going to have adequate ramps and also adequate traffic barriers for that project, so that pedestrians can adequately go and cross 95 via 294 in the parkway. So it'll be a 5-foot sidewalk with adequate ADA ramps and other related facilities.
Appreciate that, because we know that a lot of folks in our district, especially the sort of eastern corridor towards Telegraph, Caton Hill, what have you, you either might have friends and family live on the Woodbridge side, which 95 is a dividing line between our district and the Woodbridge district. And right now we know that folks sort of play Frogger and take their lives in their own hands and sort of cross on the side of the bridge there, sort of walk across the horse trail, as we call it, that has been worn down by people walking and taking their bikes, which is very dangerous. We like to make sure that we're adding actual infrastructure there so people can cross safely there. So really appreciate the question on that. And of course, Paulo and his team and Rick for looking at that and really getting that funded, because it's been a priority of our office. We only have 2 more questions before we shift over to our friends at OmniRide. This next one is, what are options for public transportation within the Hunters Ridge neighborhood area?
That's a great question. I will have to defer to OmniRide, but we work closely with OmniRide and ensuring wherever we do put bus stops that the bus can safely maneuver and stop, but also adequately access it either with a sidewalk or trail. But I'll defer. Richard, do you have anything to add? Have you dealt with any projects in the Hunters Ridge community?
We have, but not commuter ones. Again, we work with OmniRide to try to identify safe spaces for bus stops, and if facilities are needed, we try make sure that those pedestrian facilities and whatnot to get to those buses are there. but I'm not aware of anything specifically in Hunter's Ridge at this point.
That is something we'll work with OmniRide to see what options are available.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Paulo. What I will say to that part is we have been looking at some of our western areas of our county, of our district. We know that we span from I-95 in town of Occoquan all the way through the Lake Ridge area, county center, and now we include sort of that northern Hoadley area from the Parkway all the way to 234. So we know there needs some love there in terms of transportation improvements. You know, we've been talking to Hunters Ridge and other folks about what we can do there to help them out. I will tell you that, to not get ahead of the OmniRide folks too much, but one of the things that we're looking at on the transit side is first mile, last mile. So for whatever reason, there's not a bus stop right next to Hunters Ridge at the Parkway. There can be, you know, paratransit or something to bring you from your neighborhood there down to the nearest bus stop that's near Hoadley and what have you. So there are some projects we're looking at, some other transit options, looking at other than just the standard commuter bus or the large scale cross county bus. So great question. The final one we have for you all is what projects are underway and plan to revitalize the Route 1 corridor in Prince William County?
Another great question. A lot of exciting improvements and projects underway. I'll start with some of the major roadway projects. We have the Route 1 widening between Featherstone Road and Mary's Way. This will be completed by the end of the year. In addition to the roadway, it'll have adequate pedestrian crossing, a sidewalk, and a trail on each side of the roadway. We also have the Route 1 widening and Fairley Boulevard project in the town of Dumfries. That is a major project in the right-of-way phase, which will be completed in sometime 2027. I mentioned earlier, we have the Route 1 bus shelter improvements project. Very exciting project. Richard and his traffic safety team are working with OmniRide on this project. So this project is also underway. We have the North Woodbridge pedestrian improvements, pedestrian bridge project, which will connect the future Riverside development to VRE, but it'll also connect the west side of Route 1 to the transit facility east there at VRE and other locations. And we have other roadway improvements as part of the North Woodbridge Small Area Plan. We have the Marina Way extension, as well as the Annapolis Way extension project. So just examples of many projects underway to help revitalize Route 1 here in Prince William County.
Thank you for that, Paulo. The only other thing I would add to that is with the FY24 budget that we just approved, we also did add some money specifically to look at beautification of certain areas where it's landscaping, medians, things like that, because we know that, especially in some of the older areas of the county, like the eastern end of our district and that Route 1 corridor, which sort of merge into each other. We know there's a lot of older neighborhoods there that don't have some of the more modern landscaping that's been done in other parts of the district and the county. So we put some real funding towards having dedicated staff look at those areas and see how we can help beautify and bring them up to snuff with other parts of the district. I know that Route 1 and the eastern part of our district, you know, Occoquan Road and 123 are all part of the same community. So I appreciate that question, as I've been working very closely with Supervisor Franklin of the Woodbridge district on how we can make those areas cohesive, walkable, and a lot more revitalized. That said, thank you, Paulo, and your team for that. We might, if we get time, open it up to audience questions here and there as folks are able. But now we're going to shift over to our friends over at OmniRide PRTC. And Dr. Schneider, the floor is yours, sir.
Absolutely. Actually, I'm going to turn it over first to Joe Stainsby, our Chief Development Officer, who's got some information. He's got our most recent updates and where we are. We have some new exciting programs and services coming out of his various departments. And then I'll just kind of tee up in terms of where we are in our fiscal process and what we're looking at for a long-term strategy and where we're going over the next 24 months. So Joe,
all
please.
right. Thank you, Bob. Everyone hear me okay? All right, excellent. It's good evening, everyone. Pleasure to be with you all. I don't have any slides for you today, but I'm going to go through and kind of describe where we are at. I will also touch a little bit on hopefully something that is relevant to that Hunter's Ridge question, because I do think we have something to deal with that potentially. So first, looking at our ridership trends and commuter patterns, which Supervisor Boddye alluded to earlier. On the local ridership side, quite frankly, our local ridership has been fantastic. You know, it has surpassed our pre-pandemic levels of ridership, most notably because of the addition of Sunday service on the eastern side. Our commuter ridership is still about 60% of pre-pandemic levels. And we are addressing that situation by streamlining and kind of bringing efficiencies where we can. We have a service change that will take place on Monday, and we have a public hearing that is taking place right now at this exact second to look at streamlining our Lake Ridge route, and then also to kind of right-size our service a little bit for the amount of ridership that we have. We're trying to reduce the delta between the service that we're operating and, quite frankly, the amount of operators that we have to operate our service. And we feel like we've gotten to a good point here where we can really bring to bear that reliability that we were known for. We can get back to that. I have kind of a mantra here, which is we want to be large and reliable, and in order to get to large and reliable, we have to be small and reliable first. So we are not running the huge amount of service that we would like, but in order to build that reliability, that faith back, that when you see that schedule for our buses, we're going to be there, we're going to be able to run it, we're going to be able to do that. That's kind of where we are. So I did mention briefly our Lake Ridge route. And our Lake Ridge Pentagon Crystal City, that is going to be streamlined into one route to more effectively and efficiently operate that system. And we have various changes coming down the pike as well. That Lake Ridge one will go into effect in August 2023, if that happens. To talk a little bit about our Eastern Prince William County route changes, we have a few different options out there, and they have been introduced to the public. There is a major Eastern restructure potentially that is happening next year. We have the information out there over the last month. My directors of planning, my directors of marketing, our TDM team, everybody has been out there in kind of a full court press at all kinds of public hearings there in Dumfries and at the Transit Center, all over libraries, all over Prince William County, the Chin Center, doing public outreach to kind of garner opinion on what we're looking at doing for our Eastern restructure. And we'll be taking this to the Commission for a vote on July the 13th. And then implementation of the service would take place in January 2024. The big thing with that is the elimination of the fixed route deviation service in the eastern side to be replaced with full-on paratransit system, and then also an implementation of fully robust microtransit, which I'll get to a little bit later. The idea of this is with the removal of the fixed route deviation is that it'll hopefully do away with some of the frustration that people experience with our local service, where we have to build in a lot of extra time into our schedules to allow for that bus to take that deviated trip to pick somebody up. So it means that you might see one of our local buses waiting at a bus stop for longer than you think is normal. And the reason that's the case is because it's a time point, and you are allowing that time for a potential off-route trip. So improving that reliability to everyone, that's kind of our guiding light here, to do everything that we can to make our service as reliable as we can, and to really kind of rebuild that faith in our system. So the major service change on the eastern side would take place in kind of late spring of 2024, but we are out doing active public outreach for that now, and we will be doing right up until that actually happens. So the next thing, moving on to microtransit, that's kind of the new and exciting thing, and we are excited to bring that to bear in different areas. We've been operating a microtransit zone in the Manassas and Manassas Park area, concurrently with the Manassas Park 68 since December, and independent and replacement of the Route 68 in Manassas Park since January. That has been very successful. Very quick primer for the people who don't know. Microtransit is very much like an Uber and Lyft like service, except it's corner to corner as opposed to door to door, which you would expect with a taxi service. It's interacted primarily through an app, and that's going to have you walk 0.1 of a mile, 0.2 of a mile to a point of aggregation, a street corner, something like that. You would get onto a vehicle. It's going to be a smaller vehicle. It's not going to be a 35 or 40-foot bus. It's going to be a Ford Transit. It's going to be a Chrysler Voyager van, and that's going to take you wherever you want to go within the zone. And that has been stood up in the Manassas Park area and has been very successful. It's also, most importantly in that area, a much more efficient way of moving people in an area where we don't have a huge amount of transit usage. There is and will always be an excellent use case scenario for fixed route transit. But when you have a passenger load of 1 or 2 people an hour, that doesn't justify a 40-foot bus rolling around on that route. So we're using it in this particular case to replace a route that was really kind of oversized for the amount of people that were using it. But we are also right now, in fact, our soft launch was yesterday, and we'll be doing it more in earnest next week and into the future, launching our Eastern micro transit zone, which incorporates a portion of the town of Dumfries and then also the town of Quantico. And that's particularly interesting because we are, doing what we call a 3P relationship there, the public-private partnership. We currently operate a taxi cab program in partnership with Prince William Yellow Cab, and they are the people who are bringing people from the town of Quantico out into the rest of our service. And this will allow them to be more fully incorporated into what we offer. The app is going to be through a company called Rideco. And if you are going on and off the base, your service will be provided by Prince William Yellow Cab. And if you're in the larger Dumfries zone, it's going to be provided by an OmniRide driver, so a Keolis driver in an OmniRide vehicle. We're excited to bring that to bear because it makes the service more seamless to integrate with. And all of the bus stops that we have with that, this is a complementary and overlay service. And so it's designed to integrate much more with our service. And to the earlier point about Hunter's Ridge, that's not currently an area that is served by our service footprint. But to Supervisor Boddye's point, I think that what microtransit can do is that we are looking at various areas around the county and in our service footprint where potentially we could set up a microtransit zone where you have maybe less density and you don't have the access to transit. We could potentially set up a microtransit zone that loops into the rest of our services, takes people to commuter lots, links them into Route 1 and 234 and this, that, and the other. So the only thing preventing that is availability of drivers, availability of vehicles, and availability of money to pay for it all. So, it's certainly a part of our toolkit, and we are looking forward to working with people to bring that to bear where it makes sense, right? There's always, as I said, going to be a need for regular fixed route, and that is the bread and butter of what we do, and we're not looking to get away from that. But where it makes sense, this can be an extra valuable tool. And the final thing I'll say on microtransit is that, quite frankly, the other advantage to it is, and everybody's online will have seen this, is that we have had, since the pandemic, a really tough time getting people to want to do the frontline jobs, right? The idea of being a bus operator, which is a job that you should have pride and vigor in doing because it's something that moves the community around and allows people to actually live their daily lives. It's a frontline job. It's hard to get people to want to do frontline jobs. Maybe people aren't quite so kind anymore. They don't, it's just more challenging in these times. And you see that at fast food restaurants or, retail stores or anything like that. And the microtransit, you do not have to have a commercial driver's license in order to actually, drive one of those vehicles because they are smaller in capacity. And that diversifies the pool of people that we can pull from so that we can continue to ensure that we have enough operators to provide the service that we want to, which gets back to that overall reliability goal. So that's another excellent thing. And finally, for us, I want to touch very briefly on the zero emissions bus study that we have recently completed, very recently. In fact, we completed it in March. From our agency's perspective, we are, I guess you could call it, cautiously kind of putting a toe in the water. We want to be extremely good stewards of taxpayer dollars. And, quite frankly, these any electric bus, whether it's a fuel cell or whether it's battery electric, is substantially by a factor of 2 times, oftentimes more expensive than its diesel or gas powered equivalent. And so we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So we have submitted a no emissions grant to the FTA. And if we get that, keep your fingers crossed for us, we will be getting some smaller vehicles, some smaller vans, which we can potentially use to operate our micro transit service. The way that we operate our buses, especially the big commuter buses, which is out on the highway, it is very challenging for a battery electric bus to operate those routes because it's a lot of miles. There's very little opportunity for regeneration of the battery because you're on the gas a lot. And so, you sometimes you need two buses to replace one of those buses. So we are going to be building out the infrastructure with smaller vehicles at first, and then working up towards those larger vehicles. And I think we've quite frankly are more excited by the idea of a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle than we are potentially a battery electric. And that's due in no small part to the fact that, other than the fact that you're filling the bus with hydrogen, it functions very similarly. You fill it up with the hydrogen, you can drive it potentially all day. It's much more advantageous for our use case scenario. The big problem with that is, where do you fill it up with hydrogen? And the East Coast has unfortunately massively lagged the West Coast in hydrogen refueling infrastructure. And so, we are kind of taking a wait and see approach, so we can make sure that we're doing the right thing with that. So that's all the points that I wanted to hit. But one final thing that would be very remiss of me to not do would be to issue a plug for our most recent, our next upcoming, event that we are doing, which is our Senior Summit. That is taking place on June the 15th at the Palazzo building. So if anybody who is on the line, if they're interested in that, I just put a link to it in the chat. It is from 10 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. at the Palazzo building. You can come and find out more with a whole bunch of presentations and a whole bunch of cool pictures and maps, information from us about what we are doing. We'll talk heavily about the paratransit, the removal of the fixed route deviation service, but also, maybe more importantly, you can find out a whole bunch of other senior relevant information, safety and security, access to resources, accommodation, housing, all of that type of stuff. We'll have vendors there, and there are going to be presentations as well. We have our local bus service going into that facility, and we're also deviating another route to actually go into that facility as well. So you can access it on the bus, and I put the link in the chat. So Supervisor Boddye, that's it from us here. But we're happy to take questions.
Appreciate it. Dr. Snyder, I think you might be talking. If you're muted, if you are.
Yep. So one thing I did want to mention is that, Joe specifically talked about we're about 60% of ridership, but we've been operating about 80% of service volume for the last year and a half. Initially, when the pandemic hit, we dropped down to maybe 10, 15%, ran a route out of Horner Road, ran a route out of University. And by about October of 2020, we were back up to around 85, 90%, because we all thought by fall of 2020, we'd be done. 2 weeks to flatten the curve, not so much. What has really occurred is we've been paring back and paring back and paring back and paring back. And what we've realized is, when we started doing the ratios of our ridership compared to number of seats we pushed into DC every day, our June 5th ridership will match the number of occupied seats and the number of buses going into DC or Fairfax or Arlington, but those commuter services, it'll operate at the same level of proportional availability. So that what that means is, when a bus going in you grab any bus on a Tuesday, you'll have about the same exact seating capacity we had pre-pandemic. What we did not do is we did not eliminate the budget and send all that money back to the county and the motor fuels tax. We have held the cash in the budget, and actually not even we. The Prince William County Board of Supervisors, in their budget process, basically earmarked that money to remain in the motor fuels account, because should your bus become full, we now have the money to put additional resources in. And as Joe mentioned, we are now, for the first time, we will have enough drivers to get that funded. So we have really, it was a pretty ugly last summer through about March with the strike. Really, we're finally getting our feet under us from a year, and we've been hit like almost every other industry. We're down on mechanics, we're down on drivers, we're down on supervisors, we're struggling to hire even technical staff. The wages have gone through the roof, and this is just part of our budgeting process. So, just like as Joe mentioned, we can do anything. We can also do like personal jetpacks probably if we have the budget for it, but I'm not quite sure the appetite and the direction is there as things stand. So will you hear things like, okay, we're consolidating Lake Ridge, we're going backwards? Well, actually we're not. We're going back to where we were with ridership far pre-pandemic, because once upon a time those routes were one route. And as the ridership rebuilds and as we have the demand, we absolutely have the capacity to split those off. One thing I also wanted to mention that relates to the Horner Road question, we have approached VDOT and said, hey, you've got the park and ride lots. There's a lot of empty asphalt space because that was really drawn out in the 1980s. It's been resurfaced and they repaint the same pattern. If you look at how much available asphalt is, that could be redesigned and restriped. So we've asked them to take a look at it and do that. And additionally, what we've asked for is improved pedestrian standing and seating areas, shelters, real-time information. So we've made that request. So I want to, it's a little tricky because it's a VDOT managed program, but if you don't have traffic and highway people thinking mobility, it doesn't work. And a great example of that is when they lovingly built the amazing lot out at the university lot in Gainesville, they had more bicycle racks than shelters and they had no benches. It'd be easier to get across Prince William Parkway than it would be to get across some of the sections in terms of that lot. So again, they're building to a national standard, not a geographic standard always. So we work with them to help and understand, and they've been responsive. We've been able over the past few years to have some shelters replaced, upgraded, things of that nature. Right now, I know it doesn't affect residents directly, but we're working on a throughput project from Dale City to Horner Road to Pentagon and trying to make significant improvements in information, signage, timing, and all of the things that tend to get in the way. A lot of these routes ran very, very, very well pre-pandemic. The turnover of positions at the Pentagon, the turnover of VDOT personnel, just the nature of the environment has really changed the face of what we're doing. So we're getting back to basics on a lot of different things, but we're also advancing at the same time. And things like the microtransit project, things like our partnership with Keep Prince William Beautiful that brings in shelters for design, art and transit programs. So we are continue to be committed to the community. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the fact that we picked up 3 awards last week at the Virginia Transit Association meeting. We won, Joe, the 3 were for our art and transit project.
Yep. We won for the Sunday service marketing, and then Holly also won the award.
So we have an unsung hero. One of our staff, and a lot of people don't realize this, but we manage not only the Vanpool program through the Vanpool Alliance, but we also manage what is called TDM, or Transportation Demand Management. And if any of folks on the town hall have been to one of the benefits fairs at Mark Center or the Pentagon, and you see a wonderful woman standing there answering any question you've got, that's Holly Morello. She goes to the Navy Yard. She'll go anywhere. She knows everybody, and she's very, very active in helping build ridership or pair up residents. So if there's someone out there who has a job in Winchester or Maryland, and it's like, wow, I'm having to drive every day, we operate and manage a rideshare database. So we can try to pair you up with a carpool buddy or 2, so you get the free toll lanes, and try to build back to some of those standards that we had pre-pandemic. The good news is we're not staying still. We continue to make advancements, but the reality is we just don't have the ridership to sustain the volume and level of service without really burning through the resources we've got. And we want to make sure where we balance that effective approach. The Board of Supervisors has really pressed to keep a fiscal balance and a service balance. And the great news is even if we mess up and within 2 weeks we have a route that has too many humans on it, we can immediately put a bus in to support it. So it's not a scenario where it's like closing a road. If you close a road and you take up the asphalt, it's going to be a lot of work to put the road back. It's not that way in transit. So we have a lot of opportunity to be flexible. And I believe those are the main highlights we wanted to cover tonight, putting a lot of attention on that Eastern restructure so that we're not dragging the Lake Ridge residents all the way over to the OmniRide facility to make a transfer to get to Route 1, right? There's a lot of things we can do better. We would love to hear what the local needs are in terms of transportation options and ridership. So I think those are our highlights.
Sure. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Dr. Snyder, for your comments, your presentation. I wanted to highlight what you said at the end of there. Our transit system, OmniRide, PRTC, has been very agile over the last, especially 3 or 4 years. A lot has been thrown their way, whether it's the pandemic, it was the strike that Dr. Snyder talked about. So the change in how people commute to work, and sort of the massive disruption that we've seen in our normal commuter patterns. Also, basically for a while, the death of the slug system. We had sluggers going out of, especially our Occoquan district commuter lots each and every day. Hundreds and hundreds of people getting into each other's cars to go up to the Beltway, and that became persona non grata during the pandemic. So there's been a lot of adaptation and culture change around commuting over the last 3 or 4 years. And I really appreciate how Dr. Snyder, Joe, and their teams have really tried to adapt to that as these new hurdles have gone their way. That said, we have about a little bit over 30 minutes left in the town hall. I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience. Sort of if you have a question for either the transportation staff or the PRTC OmniRide staff, go ahead and use the raise hand feature, and we will get to you. Before I get to the raised hands, though, I did get a question to me privately. Mr. Robert Hartwell asked, and I'm going to kick this over to our transportation staff, Paulo and his team. When the commuter lot was over capacity, how much of that was temporary storage of boats, trailers, commercial vehicles versus actual commuter trucks and things like that had nothing to do with commuting?
Sure. Unfortunately, we don't have the information. It is a VDOT commuter lot, but we're happy to discuss this offline and get some more information for you, Mr. Hartwell.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, Paulo, thanks for all the work you've been doing. We've had multiple meetings, and we're looking at the 123 Old Bridge interchange and the commuter lot. I think Mr. Phillips did a survey, and I've been over there many times, and we found that probably 70% of the cars and trucks and trailers that were parked there were temporary storage, and they were using the parking lot. Now, we did talk to VDOT about it, and VDOT seems to have come in and cracked down on that a little bit. But I was interested in finding out about the commuter lots. I guess you don't have the information on that. Before the pandemic, were people just using that for temporary storage? I mean, when we went in there were trailers, boats, all sorts of incredible things that, and trash. It was being abused. And fortunately, VDOT seems to have taken a step to crack down on that a little bit. And, if we come back to the same kind of usage before the pandemic, that's great. But if not, and the alternatives that we're looking at on 123 and Old Bridge need to be adjusted, there is some room there at that commuter lot to take the pressure off of the business community from the VDOT plans. Thank you.
Appreciate that, sir. And yeah, Paulo, if we could reach out to folks over at VDOT to see if they can provide that data for us, I think that would be helpful. Mr. Hartwell, I appreciate your commentary and your questions about that. I know that you and others reach out to my office quite frequently about that issue of the trailers, the boats, the other storage, the trash, what have you. And we've been doing all that we can to reach out to VDOT, reach out to the businesses that are directly adjacent to that commuter lot to really get a whole court's press on really tackling that issue. As you know, it comes from a lot of different sources, so it's harder to track down, but we also have been working with the PD to make sure that as they patrol the area, they're able to have eyes in that commuter lot to make sure that we're doing everything we can. So I appreciate that. Next is Cheryl Murray. What was your question, ma'am?
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much for this time. And I'd just like to add also that I am very pleased with the cleanup that's been done at that corner road 123 lot, because I raised that concern as well. And I even ran into one of the police officers out there the State Highway Patrol as they were cleaning up the lot. So they've done a great job taking care of that. And I've just also had a little chat with Mr. Transportation, Belita. And but I will just go ahead and share it. It says there's a concern over the new auxiliary lane, 123 southbound going on to 95. There's no sound barrier wall from that start of that ramp all the way down to the Kids' Choice Gym. And there's multiple neighbors, residents right there that is deeply impacted by that noise of 92,000 average daily commuters going through there, and certainly with the auxiliary lane as well. So just wanting to get some feedback on, is there any plans to do a sound barrier wall from the on ramp at 123, 95 southbound down to the Kids' Choice Gym? Because there's nothing there at this point.
So, Mr. Boddye, if I can add to that, I've been chatting with Ms. Murray via the chat, and what I can do is, it appears that locations within VDOT's interchange project at 95 and 123, typically major interchange projects, if there's federal funds, there will be a noise study conducted. So I will confirm and get back to you, Ms. Murray, on that inquiry.
Sounds good. Thanks.
And thank you for highlighting that, Ms. Maria. We know that, as we look at all these different interchanges and different improvements to 95, the noise and sort of that footprint needs to be looked at in terms of the impact. So appreciate you highlighting that. I know that as we continue to work with our federal partners and our state partners on improving the throughput on 95, that's always consideration. So again, appreciate you doing that. And Paul, appreciate you reaching out to folks on your end to get that done. Next is, I believe, Deborah Phillips. And I can see Mr. Phillips. I see you're talking, but I can't hear you. I'm not sure if your audio is working right now. Unfortunately, we still can't hear you. You can either try to reconnect through audio or type your question in the chat, and I'd be happy to ask it for you all. And I see you're trying to connect again. So I give you a couple of seconds here. Yep, looks like you might have connected. We can't, unfortunately. I can see you mouthing, but I can't. Oh, you might have, I may hear you now. Yep, there you go. We can hear you now.
There you are.
Okay, this is Paul. All right.
Getting some feedback.
What the hell is my hearing aids? I don't think so. I just say thank you.
And you're breaking up, unfortunately. If you can go ahead and type your question in the chat, I think that would be the best way to handle this. Thank you. Next is Mr. Clancy McQuigg. The floor is yours, sir.
Hi. Hey, I have some things for Richard Weinman. One, I think we should consider, we tried this on a year ago, where we have churches that are meeting on Sunday that have a lot of walkers, to consider putting in the kind of signage we do for the high schools to lower the speed limit on these 35 and 40-mile-an-hour roads in the area where all the pedestrians are trying to get across the road, and the cars too, for that matter. So I know the county was adamantly opposed to making it safe to go to church, but I think that's a bad idea. Secondly, one of the things they do in Florida I've seen, and I understand VDOT knows about this, but it's not obvious, where you have pedestrian crossings, like for instance, Prince William Parkway, that you're going to have it, the Parkway at 995. What they do down there is they do a crosswalk, which has overhead lights on it, and it has lights buried in the pavement. And when the pedestrians hit that, I'm going to go across the road, all that stuff comes on and a stop for the traffic goes on so the pedestrian can get across. As it is, if you're a pedestrian trying to get across any one of our major roads around here, you're playing Frogger. And I don't know why VDOT refuses to do it or the county refuses to do it. But Richard, you have a lot of influence with those guys. I think illuminated crosswalks that are only illuminated when they're being used as a crosswalk would be very useful. A safety improvement. That's, for bicyclists as well as pedestrians. The other thing I'd like to see you guys consider is a bike path down to the town of Occoquan on the Occoquan Road, because there's a lot of pedestrians that use Occoquan Road and there's no place to walk down by the creek to the town limits there. So that would be a good place to expand our sidewalk area and maybe make it wide enough so you could do bikes and pedestrians. Okay, so I had a bunch of other things too. Oh, for OmniRide, I would suggest if you guys want to do micro transit, start working with the local civic associations, because they can organize the citizens in an area to do the micro transit if they know that you're interested in doing it. It's a great contact. Like Hunter's Ridge, you're talking about Hunter's Ridge. Nobody knows about it. Well, of course they don't know about it, but the HOA does, and they send out newsletters to everybody all the time. So you could easily work with the local HOAs to expand the microtransit interest and information. That's something to consider there.
Thank you.
And look, I know we're in the process of giving away all the natural gas we generate out of the landfill, but I think from a transit point of view, it would be much more useful for the county is if we put a refueling, natural gas refueling station at the landfill there for use by OmniRide and use by the school system. So we could have more gas powered vehicles on the road, and they have their own dedicated supply of natural gas, and it's basically free. They're spending a lot of money to pipe it across Dale City and tear Dale City apart to move it up into the gas pipeline that comes into the county up at Horner Road. Anyway, on the Parkway, just north of the county complex. That gas is a real asset to us, and we should find a way to use it ourselves for OmniRide and use it for the school system to get as many natural gas powered vehicles on the road as we can. I think the idea of using electric buses is ridiculous. It's way too damned expensive, and it doesn't really buy you anything, because just because you're using electricity to run the bus doesn't mean that you weren't generating a lot of carbon dioxide by the power plant that's making the electricity. They should be charged for that, so that if you're looking at electric vehicles, you should know the full burden costs on the environment of producing the electricity and transmitting the electricity to the recharging stations versus the natural gas, which we already have the infrastructure for. And I think that's all I wanted to say today. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Clancy. A lot of great feedback and ideas. Joe, to his last point, did you want to talk a little bit more and highlight sort of the zero emissions bus study and how we're looking at alternatives? Because again, Clancy brings up the point that you brought up, Joe, which is just the cost of fully electric buses.
I mean, I think that Mr. McQuigg made actually some excellent points there, and certainly that's why we are being more hesitant to dive into the pool there. Right. When it comes to, heavy use on motor coaches and on transit buses, we feel as though the economics, as well as, potentially the environmental benefits are just not there on that side of things, which is, was the conclusion pretty much of our zero emission bus study. We did feel as though there are certain benefits to it, especially with smaller vehicles, which have that inherent greater efficiency, and they're also the infrastructure to actually go into charging them is is that much more straightforward, and potentially you can look at actually doing that through solar charging and batteries and capacitors, so that you're less reliant on, you know, burning fossil fuels to generate the electricity in the first place, which, yes, I see what he means there about that kind of being a shell game. So certainly, you know, we are taking a slowly approach with that, precisely because of the points that he mentions, which are very valid.
And I'll add one other thing. In terms of compressed natural gas, I've operated multiple compressed natural gas fleets over my career. One of the key things is, do you have a pipeline out front, and do you have space for the compressors and all the necessary infrastructure? The great news is we now have space, but we are not near pipelines. And so one of the other things that happened since compressed natural gas became really the rage in the 1990s and early 2000s, there's been improved efficiency of the diesel engine in terms of emissions. So we're a lot cleaner than we were 15, 20 years ago. And the needle of what we would move, we've looked at it and we're still trying to evaluate where it goes. But to put all that infrastructure in, and then right now the Department of Energy has an East Coast hydrogen delivery project that they're working on to hopefully be housed somewhere in, our preference would be somewhere in that Fairfax, Arlington type area where you've got the right amount of density, the right amount of heavy truck, but then it gets delivered to us like a fuel. And then it's the way that hydrogen works is the hydrogen works through a barrier system that then converts to electricity that recharges the battery. So that it's kind of a really interesting thing that there's enough things happening that we're not diving in. But we already know for a fact, light and medium duty vehicles are a win. We know that right now. And even light duty vehicles, like most of the forklifts in the country run on hydrogen. It's just, they're very efficient. They're not in consistent use. So we are paying attention. And we've even really suggested that Washington Gas work more with the landfill, especially for the schools, because that facility is right next to the landfill. For us, it's a pretty long haul. But when you're right next to it, if we had a landfill next to our facility, totally different game for us. So, but it's an exciting time. And the comments about the utility of electric vehicles, we could spend the rest of the night on that. Even among transit professionals, you could put me, Randy Clark from WMATA, Josh Baker from Alexander, who's running them. You could put the three of us at a table and we're going to argue for hours on where it lands, just because it isn't where it needs to be for it to truly take over heavy duty fleets. And the final thing I'll say is, when you're running trash trucks, which can't break down, right? Which have to pick up the trash. When you're running dump trucks and you're running cement trucks and you're running heavy duty fleets like that off of a fuel, that's when you know you have success. And it really does. What's holding it back is the engine manufacturers. And once you have that ready to go, that's where my maintenance background comes in. That's the key indicator. And that's what I really encourage everyone to watch, to see how does the technology take over in the private sector, and then you'll see the public sector fall in behind. So
you're right. And we do, by the way, happen to have a very large LNG compression station at the landfill. So they're generating a lot of LNG. And that could be, like you say, you could truck it to the OmniRite site. That's no problem. You know how that works. And it's our gas. I think it belongs to the community, and the community should use it as a community resource rather than just taking a give to Washington Gas, even though they're making a profit doing that. Nonetheless, I think we have to honor the value the community puts into it by collecting and compressing all the LNG, and then figure a way to distribute it internally.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Clancy. What I'll add to that is your idea, especially for the schools, like Dr. Schneider said, is a really good one. I actually sit on the Joint Environmental Task Force with the school system in partnership with the county, and we are looking at energy and how as the school division begins to have the same conversation of converting their fleet, whether it's the smaller vehicles, their fleet vehicles, but also the school buses, to more renewable energy, what does that look like? And as both Joe and Bob alluded to, especially Dr. Schneider, they're right there. The Kelly Leadership Center is a stone's throw away from the landfill. So there are opportunities there, and we do have Tom Smith on our side of the bus, pun intended, with school staff and what have you. We're beginning to have those conversations, those strategic partnerships to really leverage both sides of the house and really how we get that done. So I appreciate that. Before we move to the last couple of questions, Paulo and your team, did you want to speak to Mr. McQuick's earlier point on the crosswalks and the lighting and those kinds of things?
Certainly, Supervisor Boddye.
Go ahead, Richard.
Thanks, Paulo. I definitely would. So unfortunately, the way the state code is written with the school zones is they only applicable that kind of school zone and speed limit reduction and what it is only applicable to school zones. So we can't implement it at any other facility such as religious institutions and whatnot, even if we wanted to. With that being said, we obviously want to make sure everyone can get to where they want to go safely, however they want to do it. So if there are places where, we can look at other alternatives, maybe building sidewalks or those kind of things, we'll definitely want to do that. The second one was about the flashing in pavement lights in Florida. Florida has one great advantage over Virginia, and this is why VDOT doesn't do it. They do not have snow plows. Snow plows will hit those once, and all of that needs to be replaced. So that is the reason why you will not see those in-pavement flashing lights generally in areas where they have any plowing operation at all. We are looking at other alternatives, and one of the things I didn't mention is we just got a very significant grant from Federal Highways for Safe Streets for All to develop a traffic safety action plan. And we will be looking for input from the community on ways to make these improvements and identify that. It's going to be towards zero death approach for the county, and we're going to be working with the city of Manassas and Manassas Park on their vision zero strategy that's part of that. And then the third thing was the sidewalk on Occoquan Road. I actually was out there today on Washington Street with representatives from both VDOT as well as the town of Occoquan to look at that missing piece of section of sidewalk down there. We would love to do that and build it. The problem we have is it's a very long stretch of road. Unfortunately, it's an old road, so the right of way, utilities, the grades, retaining walls, all that, it makes it prohibitively expensive. With that being said, we are going to continue to do it. And we already have, and Paulo, you can probably speak to this more, the Ellicott Street sidewalk is going to be tying into Old Bridge through the trail, through the back of the park. And Paulo can give you better information on that than I can. But we are looking at it. It's just, I need to check with a lot of decimal places to pay for that.
Yeah, Paolo, one thing you guys might consider is instead of building a sidewalk the way we do with concrete, is build a little bridge to the side. You've got room on the right of way down there to do that. And so it could be, a wood plank bridge, if you want to call it that, like we did down at on the water down by in Woodbridge. So that you don't need to have the thing go all the way down to the ground. You can build a cantilevered walkway to get down there without spending a lot of money.
Appreciate that, Clancy. And the last thing I'll add, and I appreciate your commentary on partnering with the Civic Association for the microtransit, the paratransit side on PRTC. I do see Delton Nichols, who's the president of the Hunter Ridge HOA, is on here. I know you represent Locapel, Clancy, hoping that as we continue to have these conversations around paratransit and microtransit, we can pull you all into your point to make sure that you're getting that word out to your constituencies, but also sharing with them that we are interested in doing these things. We know there are pockets of communities, like was brought up with Hunter's Ridge, that are interested in transit, that want to do more transit and what have you, but they're kind of far outside the normal footprint. So, Mr. Nichols, I see you're up. So, did you want to add anything to that? I see your thumbs up.
No, I agree with your point. And, if something would come about in that area, naturally, we would definitely get the word out to the community and do whatever we can to increase the efficiency of transportation in this area.
Appreciate that. Thank you. and appreciate you being on here, Mr. Nichols. Appreciate you.
And thank you for hosting this.
Sure. So we have two more. I will go first to Mr. Mark Schaeffler, who has been involved in a lot of these transportation and transit issues for quite some time. Mr. Schaeffler, the floor is yours, sir. What is your question?
Hey, Kenny. Two questions, really. The first, getting back to transportation safety. Again, one of the concerns I always have is kind of the roadway designs. A lot of these roads, especially arterials, are kind of like 12-foot roadways with high-speed vehicles on them. Because again, the network is basically built to the top, like the peak hour commuting time. Whereas, off peak is where I think Prince William is very dangerous because, with less traffic, vehicles go faster. And I'm just trying to understand from a kind of a policy point of view, how can we get VDOT or the DOT to kind of allow for things like 11-foot traffic lanes instead of 12-foot lanes? Because we talk about a sidewalk on Prince William Parkway. Well, it's only 5 feet because we got to maintain 4 12-foot lanes, whereas it could have been an 8-foot sidewalk across 95 with 11-foot lanes. I'm just trying to understand, does it require our legislators to force VDOT to change some of their design codes on some of these arterial roads? Because I see like Fairfax County is designing 11-foot lanes on their Route 1 with a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit. Arlington is designing their Route 1 for 25-mile-an-hour speed limit with 11-foot lanes. How do we change the paradigm for Prince William County to make our roads safer, whereas these other counties are trying to make their roads safer? How do we get that to happen? And that's what I'm just trying to, is it require like someone to put legislation in to kind of give the county more say over the roadways, some of the roadway design? Because again, like Route 1 is almost built to a 60-mile-an-hour speed limit. Some of the areas have like a 15-foot lane in some sections. It's pretty crazy. But that was my first question. And the second question for kind of the Western Occoquan area, about transit and potential transit on Route 28 at some point. I would be very interested in trying to understand, if that could be linked with potentially the finishing of the Route 28 bypass or the project that Danica Rome is pushing for improving Route 28, some sort of linking transit service with the finishing of those type of projects within the next like six years or something like that. Because I feel like right now, that Fairfax County is doing more transit planning for Prince William County Route 28 than OmniRide is. I mean, from what their plans are.
I want to just make clear that we can't run transit if we don't have a corridor. If we're stuck in traffic, you're faster than us. And that's what makes transit work, speed.
Yeah.
And so what they're doing is they're improving their throughput, not because they want to take care of us, but because they want to reduce the volume of congestion into Prince William County so the residents can get home quicker. And so as you well know, because you've attended so many of the events, Route 28 is not a transit corridor, it is a commuter corridor. And so a great example of that is Route 66. 66, we sat in the stop and go traffic along I-66 for years. Well, as soon as 66 lanes opened up and we have 35-minute access or 45-minute access to the Pentagon, our ridership has boomed there. So really it's dedicated lanes. So want to stress that it's not a transit issue, it's a land use and dedicated lane issue. So once you have that pump, and a great example of that is right now, one of the top conversations that is really something that I like, if I could wave my wand and do one thing, I would want bi-directional travel on I-95 in hot lanes. Like that would be a transit game changer on 95. Like if that's the one thing I could do, that would be super, super cool. So that's an example of where it is dedicated lane infrastructure. That way we can take full advantage of the slugs because there's a ton of people going up Route 28. People are headed into Fairfax. People are headed into Fairfax Government Center area. They're going into the Mosaic District for some of the business complexes there. So that density of 28 is a corridor-driven issue, and we're happy to be a part of it. But that dedicated lane function is going to be key. The final thing I'll point out is we're actually doing reverse commuting on Route 28 when the traffic congestion isn't atrocious. So we are operating on Route 28, but we're doing it in a way that is reasonably efficient and reasonably effective coming in from Tyson's Corner into Manassas in the mornings, and then the afternoon it does the reverse loop so that we can get people from Manassas straight up 28 to Tyson's Corner. So that's just a little bit of in the weeds for maybe some of your residents who don't hang out on Route 28. We should probably get it back to talking about Lake Ridge, Occoquan, that kind of stuff. So
Yeah, and before I kick it over to Paulo for the rest of Mr. Scheifler's comments on that, bidirectional and I-95 hot lanes, I've been all for it. I actually petitioned my colleagues and we got it into the comp plan to look at talking about that. Was actually talking to a representative of Transurban just 2 weeks ago about it. They're actually very interested in this too. I know Fairfax is. So what was once a pipe dream is now actually being discussed. And I know Mr. Scheifler, you've also talked about bidirectional on I-95 as well, and the corollary to us having Route 1 become a more transit corridor with BRT and other things as well. So we're looking at that. I am a big supporter of it, so we're looking at that. But Paulo, if you want to talk about especially the Route 28 bypass and that becoming sort of a more transit-oriented corridor, would appreciate before we move to our last question.
Sure. When it comes to the bypass, it is a limited access facility. So the intent is to improve mobility and throughput along the corridor. But somewhat related is existing 28. You have the 28 bypass. Mr. Schufler mentioned Delegate Rome's projects. Delegate Rome was able to obtain funding to look at operational improvements along that corridor. So there's different ways to improve mobility along that corridor. Bob mentioned that is a land use issue, and it is it's a land use item. So it's something we're looking at as a county, working with the planning office. We actually received a technical assistance grant through TPB to look at transit mobility in Yorkshire. So there's something that's going to be looked at more working with our transit partners.
Yeah, Paulo, as far as being able to reduce lanes or lose lane width, I was just interested from more of like a county level thing. Could you make 11-foot lanes on Route 1 or something like that, similar to what Fairfax is doing? For that kind of concept, how does VDOT approve that, but wouldn't allow us to do that or of some level? I mean, just trying to understand that, because again, 12-foot lanes just lead to higher speeds, especially at night when traffic's not as heavy and there's more opportunity for speeding. How do we try to change the paradigm where we make it safe at all times, as opposed to, I think that in general, arterial roads, shouldn't be that wide, to maintain, that speed limit. They're designed for higher speed than the posted speed limit. And that's just a struggle for me as far as how do we fix that as the county becomes more dense and has more people over the next 20 years?
Sure. Great question. We are starting to look at length of traveling in certain areas in the county where VDOT allows us. At the end of the day, it is a VDOT standard, but also it's also can be driven by county standards. We're going through and updating our design and construction standards manual. So we have urban standards with narrower travel lanes. So it's something we're looking at. We can have our county standards, but also it's up to VDOT on a lot of the busier roadways, your arterials and some of your major collectors. So it's something that has to be discussed with VDOT. It is a policy matter for them as well. But as we look at our small area plans, for example, and some of the other corridors, we are starting to look into new standards.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, the fact that we had to put a pedestrian bridge over Route 1 to make it safe, tells me that Route 1 is not safe. That's just the general comment. But, I understand the need. But again, how do we balance those and make as this area becomes more populated, how do we make improvements that are appropriate? So I can see it happening in Fairfax and Arlington, and when do we jump on that boat? Is it just kind of
definitely applicable in certain areas, especially your small area plans like Northwood Bridge. In some areas in the county, you will still have higher speeds and higher volumes, but we are starting to look at different standards in some of your urbanized areas and urbanized corridors, like Route 1, as you mentioned.
Appreciate it. And so we have a couple minutes left. I did want to get to the very last question. Mr. Scheifler, as always, thank you for your questions, your engagement. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kenny.
Yep. Our last sort of question / comment comes from Eileen Sheridan. To go back to definitely talking about the 95 corridor, the eastern part of our district. Talking about the crosswalk and the crossing project for I-95. The sort of the concern / question is a crosswalk over I-95 ramps is not a safe solution. Like Prince William Parkway is the same being planned for the design of the Route 123 improvement.
Supervisor Boddye said in the chat. I'm just
Yeah.
trying to get
Yeah,
ready.
I'll go ahead and I'll put it in the chat here.
So for the 123 improvements, if that's the question, the project is still in the conceptual stage. We have general ideas of crossing, but there are at-grade crossings where you have a crosswalk and a pedestrian signal. When an interchange is being designed, we make sure our engineers look at adequate line of sight, clear line of sight, and making sure there's not too many conflicts between vehicles and our pedestrians. When it comes to the 123 improvement, not sure if there's a couple improvements along the corridor. With any of our projects, we make sure there's safe crossings. A lot of our projects have pedestrian signals for our pedestrians. So it's something that's looked into as part of a project design. I wasn't sure which project she was referencing, but for all projects, it's something that's.
And I think that her question is very directed towards 123 and 95 because we're looking at that larger star study area.
Got it. Okay, correct. Okay.
Yeah, because there's a crossing over 95 there as well. So what are your elaboration in terms of safety, in terms of crossings and what have you?
Sure, it's still under design. It is likely that there may be a at-grade crossing. So we'll work with VDOT on that as they progress through the design. And I can defer to Richard. Anytime there's a crossing or a ramp, we want to make sure there's clear visibility, adequate signage, ramps, and other items. I don't know, Richard, is there anything you want to add on pedestrian crossings of ramps?
Certainly, Paulo. So, I mean, the challenge when you're crossing interstates is you have a free flow condition. You know, we ideally you either want to do a great separation or you want to have a control device on, like in those situations. Unfortunately, when you're crossing I-66 or I-95 on those cross ramps, on those on ramps and off ramps, you just don't have the luxury of doing that. So we do what we can to make it as safe as possible. Ultimately, they always are going to be a relatively high risk compared to a lot of the other crossings. But putting in lighting, putting in signage, markings, all those kind of things is what we do. But it is a priority, and it is something that is inside that. And we definitely, as we go through the design process with that, I know we do, and VDOT values all that input to push to make those improvements, because we definitely do value it.
Appreciate it. So that was the last question. That was the last answer. I wanted to thank everyone on here, both our panelists and the members of the public who attended this. Joe, Dr. Schneider, Paulo, Richard Weinman, Megan, everyone else from both the Omni Ride and the Department of Transportation side. Thank you so much for joining us. I know there are probably burning questions that we didn't necessarily get to. Please feel free to reach out to my office. More than happy to shepherd those off to the folks that can handle those questions. I know we have some homework and some other questions to go back and get information from, so we'll also follow up with that. Dr. Schneider, Paulo, did you guys want to share anything before we wrap up?
I will mention one thing is that our local service is operating on zero fare. The reason we're doing that is we've been shuttling our talent outside the region that has a federal subsidy, and our local passengers don't. Plus, with the pandemic, we figured out how much we were spending on fare collection, and it's not quite a break-even scenario, but for the benefit and the value and what we mean to communities along the Route 1 corridor, Dale Boulevard, et cetera, it really is something. It's an opportunity that the Prince William County Board of Supervisors has supported for zero fare. That being said, come try us out. I got to plug us where we operate services up to the metro stations on the weekend. You want to head into DC, that service is zero fare. So come ride with us, experience what it is. If you've got questions, let us know. But if you have a Rotary Club you're a member of, if you have a civic association, we are more than happy to come speak, talk about issues as it relates specifically to your area, or help talk about the issues that you're concerned with, whether it's our partnerships with the business community, our partnerships with the education forces, such as NOVA, Prince William County Schools, et cetera. We're happy to be part of the Lake Ridge community, which we love.
Thank you. Paulo?
So everybody, I just want to thank the opportunity and for this forum to have a dialogue with your constituents. Public and community input is very important for our department. So we appreciate and we continue to look forward working with the community as we implement the county's vision and your vision for mobility in the Occoquan district. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Quick couple last keeping things. Next month, we will be doing a community safety town hall. So stay tuned for that. And then again, the month after that, we'll be looking at 123 in Old Bridge, that project specifically. So stay tuned for that as well. Again, thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the members of the public. We cannot do the job we do without hearing directly from you all. We're doing our best job when we're able to interface directly with the citizens like this. So again, thank you for your time. Again, this will be posted online in the future. So thank you, everyone, and have a great night. Bye now.
Thank you.
God bless you all.
Thank you.